active life of service or ministry. It does not lack a sense of mission. In other words, really, it's not as if being contemplative is in some way in opposition to being more active in our lives. A helpful question, at least as we begin, as we contrast the active and the contemplative and wonder which of these may be more substantive or significant or important in our Christian lives, a helpful question for you to keep in the back of your minds is just the question, which is more important, inhaling or exhaling? Soon as we ask that question, we already realize that there's a rhythm here and you don't get one without the other. So likewise when it comes to living contemplatively. Catherine of Siena, a 14th century lay Dominican woman, born the year before the Black Death came to Siena, who early in life, really at the age of 7, had already vowed herself to Christ after an experience of a vision of him, eventually chose to spend a period of time, really her whole life she wanted to do that, in solitude. In her parents' home is where she ended up because they provided her a cell, a small space in their home, and she lived there for 3 years. In that cell, growing in her love of God, deepening her contemplation, but eventually was called by Christ out of that context to be more active in Siena with the sick, the poor, eventually attracting disciples. Later, Raymond of Capua became her confessor, a good friend, and with that, wider political involvements as she was drawn to settle difficulties in Pisa, Florence, even Avignon, to where the popes had moved, and in Pisa she had received the stigmata. She died young at the age of 33 in Rome. She desired to live deeply, contemplatively in union with Christ. And when she heard Christ encouraging her, calling her to come forth from those years of solitude, to be more present to the world, more active there, she was distressed, deeply distressed, as if somehow she had offended Christ, as if he maybe didn't love her anymore to the same degree. And so Raymond of Capua tells us in his Life of Catherine that Christ had said to Catherine, "I have no intention whatever of parting you from myself, but rather of making sure to bind you to me all the more closely by the bond of your love of your neighbor. Remember that I laid down 2 commandments of love. On these 2 commandments, as I myself bore witness, depend the whole law and the prophets. On 2 feet you must walk my way. On 2 wings you must fly to heaven." This is clearly an important statement of how Christ, speaking to Catherine, and how Catherine later came to understand this union between the contemplative and the active dimensions of our lives. Which is more important, inhaling, exhaling? We must all learn to walk on 2 feet. To try to fly with 1 wing or walk on 1 foot, either the foot of love of God or that of love of neighbor, doesn't work. In a similar way, Meister Eckhart, also a 14th century Dominican mystic, earlier than Catherine, who had studied in Paris and Cologne, became very active as a prior and provincial in the Dominican order, taught in Paris, preached in Strasbourg, in Cologne, lived a very active life, obviously, and yet is known to us today as perhaps one of the more profound mystics in the Christian tradition. So again, here we have someone living a deep mystical life and yet an extremely active life. Eckhart gives us a new interpretation.